Hi everybody, my name's Jeremy and this is the Live Wire Review Podcast. Every week we're going to try and put out one of these episodes as long as something doesn't come out in my life that prevents me from doing so. So stay tuned every week to see if we do a new episode. And today we're going to be covering a few different topics, so stay tuned and we're going to get into what those topics are in just a second. If you're listening to this program on Spotify, I highly recommend you check out our YouTube channel. It's at youtube.com/@LiveWireReview. You're going to find review content there. There's going to be repair tips. We talk about different parts of the EV industry, and we've recently started interviewing industry leaders. So check that out. There's a lot of good content there. It's really worth your time. So the topics we're going to be covering today is about predictions for the industry. The main bulk of this podcast today talks about my predictions for the industry, judging by some of the changes that have happened to the industry lately. And other topics, I'm just going to be covering some news that I've heard and some neat little tidbits of information out there. So without further ado, okay, we're going to start with the sales predictions. So I'm predicting that 2024 to 2025, we're actually going to have very slow sales in EVs. There'll still be an uptick from the year before, but they're going to be very slow. And that's for a couple of different reasons. It's in my mind, honestly, it's mostly due to the interest rate. We had to curb inflation in the industry, and the interest rate has gone up to a point where the borrowing cost is very high. Think about this for a second. When I purchased my Model 3 long range, I was actually upset because the interest rate was 3.49%. So the borrowing cost was somewhere around $5,000 or $6,000 if I used the entire term of the loan. Now, when I was looking up a Model Y a while ago, the interest rate was, let's say, around 7 or 8% in the used market. And for the cost of that Model Y, the borrowing cost was about $21,000. I couldn't believe it when I looked up the borrowing cost. Now, when a lot of people buy vehicles, they don't look up the borrowing cost. They just kind of sign the paperwork. They see what is the payment every month, and they go from there. It really is important to understand your sales contract, especially when it comes to the cost of borrowing, because in the end, that's what you're paying for the car. So for example, at the time, I think this Model Y was about 66,000 to 70,000 Canadian with a borrowing cost of $21,000. So if you take the baseline to 70,000 and you add 21,000 to it, you're looking at $91,000 for a $70,000 vehicle that is going to depreciate at a very quick rate. So if you look at the interest rates right now, hovering between 8 and 10% in some cases, the borrowing cost is astronomical. So a car that I was able to afford a couple of years ago is actually very unaffordable now. So when it comes to 2024 to 2025, I think that is the biggest factor when it comes to the sale of EVs. I don't think that people are actually uninterested in them. The severe cost of an EV is so high that when you add that cost of borrowing to it, it makes it very difficult. Now, there's another factor that factors in there is the switch from the early adopters to the mainstream public. So I myself, Adam Bourgeois, and a couple other people that I know, especially the ones making these videos, we're all early adopters. We were all very interested in this technology early on. For example, back when I was working at Acura as an apprentice technician, I was very interested in the Hyundai Kona Electric when I heard it in the news. And basically that magic number for me was any EV that could travel over 400 kilometers in good weather would give me enough range for what I needed when it was cold out or when the weather was really bad, or if you're driving into a strong headwind, even if you're towing. And yes, I know you shouldn't tow with an EV, you get about half the range, but they are quite usable for that. So I do tow with my EV. It actually does make a very good tow vehicle. And because I only do local runs, it's never been a problem for me. So on from that, we are switching from the early adopters to the mainstream. And that is a factor that is preventing EV sales. A lot of the misinformation in the media doesn't help. Uneducated salespeople don't help. And it's difficult to tell people that a more expensive vehicle may cost you less in the long run. If you check out my interview with Adam Bourgeois, check it out on the YouTube page, you'll see very far into it, probably around like 35 to 40 minutes into that interview, we were actually talking about the cost of owning an EV. And there's an infographic I bring up there that shows a gas-powered Kona sitting around $25,000 versus an electric Kona that I think was sitting, don't quote me on this, about $44,000. The irony is it was actually 27% less to own the Kona Electric, despite the fact that it was so much more for that upfront cost. Now, this is a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, so this is why it's hard to go from early adopters to the mainstream public. The last factor, it's actually kind of a small factor, but it does affect my purchase position in some ways, is the NACS connector, the Tesla connector. As we know, the Ford products, the Hyundai products, and many other products on the market are actually going to come with a native NACS port, which means that they are going to come with that Tesla port from the factory starting after 2025. And they're not telling us right up front which vehicles are going to have that port right away. And a lot of people might just want to wait for an EV that has enough range, has access to the Tesla Supercharger network, and already comes with the port on it. So that way they can just plug into that Tesla connector and just go have lunch, you know? It's so much easier. Any EV you buy now, you'll still be able to use those Supercharger network, but you're gonna have to use an adapter. As we know, they actually are gonna be free for Ford and possibly even Rivian customers as well. Moving on to the next prediction here, 2025 to 2027, I think you're gonna see a lot of new models come out in the industry. They're not gonna be available for purchase right away. Think Chevy Silverado EV. I know they're gonna be starting production in 2025-ish, maybe a little later, and a lot of the work trucks are making their way out now. It's gonna be hard to get them though. So with all these new models coming out, I think people's interest is going to start to peak again in 2025 to 2027 because Toyota's going to offer new models. Like if Fisker survives, they're going to offer some different models. Rivian is going to come out with the R3, the R3X, and the R2, which is really exciting news. And all these new products coming to the market are really going to start to pique interest again. So some EV sales will go up from 2025 to 2027, but the problem is you still won't have access to the complete mix of products on the market just because they haven't ramped up production. They aren't able to get them out to consumers. So this is my thoughts for 2025 to 2027. Now, moving on from 2027 to 2030, I'm thinking we're gonna hit about 15 to 20% EV sales across the board. Maybe a little higher, but I'm thinking 15 to 20%. I know in Q3 2023, we were actually sitting in Canada here at about 13.3% of vehicles with a plug. And that is pretty neat. So we're on the right path here. But in North America, we have very long driving distances. And again, with that negative media, it's a little harder to ramp up other than places like in Europe and Norway, where they're starting to do the right things. Their production of EVs is ramping up faster. People are getting interested faster. The infrastructure is starting to come in a little bit more. 2030 to 2035, I think the EV prices are actually going to start to get near gas vehicle prices. They are predicting that in 2027, it will cost as much to build an EV as it will cost to build a gasoline-powered vehicle. Now, that savings will take a little bit of time to work its way to the consumer. You're not going to see the price savings directly in 2027 because in some cases, a lot of automakers are actually losing about $6,000 per EV that they sell. Now, that's not the same across the board. Tesla makes a profit. Hyundai makes a very small profit. And then most of the other legacy automakers are actually losing money on every EV they sell. But this is to be expected, especially with this new technology. If you remember back the history of Tesla, they didn't make a dollar for many, many years. And now Tesla has been making vehicles since, I'm going to say 2007, 2008, when they started up. And they announced the Roadster, and they brought the Roadster out. They had difficulty with that vehicle. And then they ramped up the Model S. And then they had production hell when it came to the Model 3. And a few years later, they are now making money on all those vehicles. In fact, the Model Y was the best-selling passenger vehicle in 2023. I know the F-150 sold more than that, but that is quite the accolade for the Tesla Model Y, an all-electric model, to be the best-selling model in 2023. So 2030 to 2035 is actually when the consumers are going to start seeing that savings and the companies are going to be able to ramp up production. It is going to take from 2027 to 2030 to really ramp up, to get those EVs to the customers, to get them on dealers' lots and like ready to buy right now, especially as the demand starts to go up. Now, we're going to see upwards of 30% all EV sales. It's still going to take a while to get through this in North America. We're not going to hit the numbers that they're expecting through the politics. And you got to remember with politics, they're only in office for about 4 years. So there's going to be a lot of changes there when it comes to the policies regarding EVs. I know we're supposed to be 100% EV or at least emissions free from 2030 to 2035 in different parts of the world. But you have to understand that's not going to happen. I am an EV advocate here with this channel. I really believe in them, but I also am a realist. I understand they don't work for everybody. There's a lot of cases where you need to carry liquid fuel in order to get around to different places. Let's say the Yukon and anywhere where it's really extremely cold with huge long distances between things. So plug-in hybrids are going to play a huge role in this process. It's not going to be all EV. It's going to be a very, very, very large portion of electric vehicle sales because their efficiency is so good. You can push anywhere from 90 to 95% efficiency with an all-electric vehicle. And for passenger transport, it just makes perfect sense. I've been driving EVs for over 5 years now, and that efficiency is just incredible. To go from Midland, Ontario to Wonderland and back, it only costs $2.08 to drive an electric vehicle there and back. The efficiency is just out of this world. And the amount you get back from your regen, it just makes perfect sense. But there are some use cases where it doesn't. It makes sense when it's a car. It makes sense when it's a mid-size SUV. It starts to drop off as you get into the pickup truck segment. So I'm just going to finish this prediction off here. 2035 to 2050. I'm thinking up to 50 to 70% EV, but plug-in hybrids are also going to be a big part of that. North America, that last 30%, it's going to be hard to fill. So I think it's going to be a mix of different technologies in the future. It's not just going to be EV. So that brings me into my next topic, because there is a plug-in hybrid vehicle that I think is absolutely perfect. Brought to you by the only company that put V8s in a mid-sized pickup truck, a company that isn't afraid to stand out. You'll also know them for the new Dodge Charger electric muscle car that is coming out. But even more important than that Dodge Charger electric vehicle, it is the Ramcharger. If you don't know how vehicles are set up, the Ramcharger is very unique because it is something called a series hybrid or a series electric vehicle or a series plug-in hybrid. Now, what do I mean by series? Most of them hybrids are a parallel setup. The engine can drive the wheel in some capacity. Even in a Chevy Volt, if the battery charge was low enough, there was actually one running situation where a clutch would attach the engine to the drive wheels through that power split device. Now, with the Ramcharger, that isn't a thing. So a series hybrid in this case, the Ramcharger is a fully electric truck. It can fast charge. It has a very large battery, something around the 98 kilowatt hour range. Don't quote me on that. I don't have the figure for it right in front of me right now, but it gives you an all electric range of around 192 kilometers. Now, let's put it this way. Even in bad weather, let's say you're towing a trailer in bad weather and you only get 90 to 100 kilometers worth of range out of that Ramcharger pickup. You can fast charge it if you want to keep your efficiency up. You can go back to your base and you can charge it there, but they've added something very clever with this truck. It's an all-wheel drive vehicle, battery between the axles like any other electric vehicle, but under the hood, there's a 3.6 liter V6 Pentastar engine. And the reason that is unique is this engine does not drive the wheels. It is only under the hood as a generator. And it has a couple of party tricks. So this engine will put out 130 kilowatts worth of power. So there's a couple of unique situations this will actually come in very helpful. With a series hybrid pickup truck such as this, if you're towing a large load up a hill, there is a certain amount of power that the battery pack can put out. The larger the battery pack you have, the more amperage it can put out. You're always limited by the voltage of the pack, but you can put out more amperage as long as you have a larger pack. That's why an F-150 Lightning with a 131 kilowatt hour battery versus a 98 kilowatt hour battery has more power. It has more horsepower, it can put out more amperage. So with this series hybrid, you've got a pretty good size battery. It can do 99% of your cases. But just in that one moment, let's say you're taking a 10,000 pound trailer up a mountain and that battery pack can't quite put it out for certain amounts of the hills. Let's say you have a really steep grade. The engine can turn on and put out 130 kilowatts worth of extra power when required. And that extra power is actually sent directly into the battery through the charging system and then can be used instantaneously to the wheels. So despite the fact that the engine is not connected to the wheels, it has a very efficient way of transferring that power to the wheels when you need it. And that's why I think this is one of the most clever designs of vehicle I have seen in years. The Chevy Volt came pretty close, but the Ramcharger is a fully electric truck. It makes perfect sense. It's also completely future-proof. Think about it this way. It has a V6 under the hood now. In other markets in the world, it could have a small diesel engine that maybe doesn't put out as much power and it just charges the battery on the run. So you can use some of your most efficient ICE technology from today and tomorrow, and you can still put it in this electric truck and do 90% of your driving with all electric, which is very cheap, as we know, 90 to 95% efficient. And in the future, you could take out that engine completely, not change the truck at all, which Dodge is famous for. Sorry, I'm not going to say Dodge, Ram, because in this case, it's a Ram pickup. It's no longer called Dodge. So the Ram pickups have always been like that. They run a certain style for so many years. Think about the classic Ram that's out now. It came out in 2010, and they are still making it today in 2024. So by future-proofing this design, they can take out that engine. Everything else about the truck stays exactly the same. And they can actually put a hydrogen fuel cell under the hood. So that means that we're ready for anything that comes, or any other type of fuel that we come up with in the future. So that's my rant about the Ramcharger. I think it's amazing technology. Imagine if all cars were set up like this, or at least heavy pickup trucks. A plug-in hybrid that you can get all your regen going down the hill. So let's say that engine had to turn on, you had to get up that big mountain pass, but you're coming down the other side. The disadvantages of a hybrid in that case is a hybrid usually only has a very small battery. A plug-in hybrid has a little bit bigger battery, let's say 13 to 20 kilowatts, depending on what type of vehicle it is. This one's a 98 kilowatt hour battery. Let's say you drained a whole bunch going up that hill and you come back down the other side of the mountain. If they have programmed this correctly, towing a 10,000 pound weight behind you, you're gonna get so much of your range back going down the other side of that hill that you'll be able to tackle the next hill. It'll be like you're driving that trailer on flat ground, which I've experienced myself in my own electric car. Driving from Midland to Georgetown, there is one route there that is up and down hills all the way. And you gain so much power down the hill that you get all of it back to go up the next hill. And by the time you get to your destination, your efficiency numbers are crazy good. It's like you're driving on flat ground. So series hybrid, it's the way to go. I'm surprised it's the first time we've seen it in the industry, and I'm really excited to see what it's gonna cost. So let's move on to the next piece of news for this week. Rivian now has access to the Tesla Superchargers. And if you saw my video from a little while ago where I took the F-150 Lightning to the chargers, I'm gonna try this again because somebody called me out on it. I'm sure I could have pulled up a few more inches to see if that charge cable would fit. But here in Canada, there are bollards in front of the Supercharger and I had to park sideways. You may not have to. Check it out, see if you can pull your truck all the way up and make that charge cable reach. But what's unique with Rivian getting access to the Supercharger network is their charge port is on the front. So if you're towing a trailer with the Rivian, you'll be able to pull right up to that Tesla Supercharger. You have so many more places to charge. I am really excited about this news. So we're gonna have a video out soon about the Rivian charging at the Tesla Supercharger, so stay tuned for that. One piece of information I found this week, which I thought was pretty interesting, there is a condo, I believe in London, Ontario, if I have this correctly, EVE Park condo. It comes with a free Tesla Model 3 long range. This condo establishment is actually set up around electric vehicle lifestyle. So every parking spot comes with an electric vehicle charger. The building is set up to be net zero. So check it out, EVE Park condo. It's really interesting. And I'm trying to follow along with that. I may give them a call and see if I can interview them. We'll see about that in the future. Ford has also announced something interesting this week. They're going to make a low-cost EV 2026. They're going to try for that and maybe make it around 25,000 US. I think a few automakers are going to try and aim for this market, the really inexpensive EV for the masses. This is going to be a very hard product to make. Think Ford Model T. Think how difficult that was to get out to the public. And Ford was the first one who came out with the assembly line. Now they're going to try and do it again with EVs. Hopefully they bring back a small car. I think Ford really does need to make small cars again, especially since they are a worldwide company. I think this would do really well in Europe. And for anybody here in North America that can't afford those big expensive SUVs or the luxury things like a Model 3 or something like that, this is really going to help. It really is going to help. The Hyundai Kona is a perfect example of this. It's a really inexpensive car that's really good. This is actually going to be cheaper. So stay tuned for that. I think 2026 Ford's small, cheap EV is going to be really cool. This one, it's a thought that I had. I used to work at Toyota, and the Toyota Prius came out with a really neat piece of technology a few years ago. If you're familiar, there is an all-wheel drive Prius. For some reason, the plug-in hybrid version of this vehicle does not come in all-wheel drive. I'm going to explain this here for a second. The motor that is in the back is what I'm super interested about, and I want to tell you about that motor today and why I think it should be in more vehicles. I really wish it was in my Hyundai Kona, for example. So in the back of a all-wheel drive Toyota Prius, there is a very, very small motor in the back. It's only 7 horsepower, and it's something called an induction motor. So if you're familiar with how the motors work in these cars, there's 2 different types. There's an induction motor, and there's a permanent magnet motor. I'll use my Model 3 for an example. In the rear of the Model 3, where most of the driving happens, there is a special permanent magnet motor with a segmented magnet that's in 4 parts. Now, I'm not an engineer, so I don't understand how that helps, but it makes this permanent magnet motor 10% more efficient than everything else in the industry. And that's one thing I find really unique to Tesla, is the fact that they have so much control over building that motor that they were able to make it 10% more efficient. Imagine taking a Hyundai Kona or an Ioniq 5 and putting that motor in it and making it 10% more efficient. Getting a little bit off track here though, it's permanent magnet in the back, which means that there's permanent magnets in it. They are always magnetized. So as long as that motor moves, it's going to create current. So if you want to turn that motor off, you actually cannot. You have to either match it with the inverter to match the rotational speed, or you have to have a disconnect device. So in the Ioniq 5, for example, the front motor is also a permanent magnet, and they actually have to have a device, just like a 4-wheel drive vehicle, where it physically disconnects the motor from the drivetrain. And the way they do this is they spin up the motor to the speed that the drive shafts are turning, and then the disconnect device goes across while you're driving, and that's how that one works. The Model 3 is different. It uses an induction motor in the front for the all-wheel drive system. And the reason I find that unique is because the induction motor is not permanently magnetized. You actually have to send an electric current through that motor in order to turn it on. So there's the stator on the outside, and then there's a rotor in the middle. So the rotor actually has to be magnetized by turning on a magnet using the inverter. And the advantage to this is it can turn on instantaneously whenever you need that power, which is perfect for an all-wheel drive system. There's no disconnect device required, and that motor can spin infinitely when it's turned off because there is no magnetic field. Now that brings me back to that Prius motor. The Prius is a very, very efficient vehicle. It can get 54 miles per gallon in front-wheel drive trim, and with this all-wheel drive setup, it only sacrifices 2 miles per gallon. That rear motor, being only 7 horsepower and an induction motor, can be turned on whenever you need it. And in the Prius, it's only turned on when you first take off or if it's slippery out. Now, in the case of my Kona electric, that would be absolutely perfect. Imagine if you only sacrificed the equivalent of 2 miles per gallon and you could give a low-cost EV all-wheel drive. I love my Kona, but it's one of the only things missing from the car, and I can't stand it when I end up at a slippery slope and I just can't quite make it up the hill and I have to make several runs at it. This electric motor from the Prius would be so good for the rest of the industry. So that's my rant about that one. Check it out. It's a really neat piece of technology. I'm sure there's some more info out there. Maybe I'll post something on the screen. I'll just show a picture. So this week I also heard that Waterloo, Ontario is actually receiving their first electric bus. Now that's pretty good news. They're actually going to add quite a few more to the fleet. And as you know, there's actually a few electric buses running around in Toronto and several hybrid buses as well. Now you might see fuel cells in the future, but the infrastructure just isn't there yet for hydrogen. Part of the problem with hydrogen is most of the time it comes from dirty sources. The oil companies are still the ones who are compressing it out of natural gas, for example, putting it on trucks and delivering it where it needs to go, rather than using reformers on site. So you're going to see a few more electric buses, and you're going to see a lot of hybrid buses. Now, ironically, some of the buses that are coming out in the industry now are actually lighter than their diesel hybrid counterparts when they're fully electric, just because some of the changes they've made to them. So I'm pretty excited. Waterloo is their first electric bus. I hope to see more of this coming soon. It would be really nice to see more school buses that are electric too. It's the perfect use case because a school bus always does the same route twice a day and it goes back to a depot. So it's super simple for it to just go back, charge, and do the route again at the second time in the day. Moving on from there, there is a new recall out when it comes to the ICCU in Hyundai and Kia electric vehicles. Now this finally explains why the 12-volt batteries were going dead. And that's because this is something called the Integrated Charging Control Unit. So what dealers are going to do is if there is a DTC in the system, they're going to end up replacing the ICCU and giving an update if it doesn't come with it from the factory when they get a new part. Now, most of the time, you're going to be going in and you're just getting a software update. So the charging control unit includes the DC to DC converter for 12 volt. And what they're having problems with is during charging, it's actually getting too hot. The thermal management for the ICCU, for some reason, they've made a mistake with it. So the update is going to be monitoring the thermal condition of the ICCU, and that should prevent any 12-volt failures in the future because it was not able to charge the 12-volt battery if that unit overheated and was not able to charge, which would allow the 12-volt battery to die and you could not start your vehicle. So that is really good news that they've actually found the cause and they've come out with a recall and they're going to fix that. That actually leads me into the Ford Mach-E. I just wanted to do a little show and tell here. A lot of companies are now making electric vehicles and there are teething pains. Tesla's gone through those teething pains. They've improved their products immensely over the last decade. They still have some way to go when it comes to body gaps and everything that legacy automakers do so well right now. But the legacy automakers are having other problems. For example, the Mach-E actually has a recall on the power relay assembly. Now this is a Hyundai one, it's just something I can show you. In the Mach-E, this is actually inside the battery pack. So they actually have to drop the battery pack, open it up, and they have to change this out because they were having problems with it drawing too much current. People are having too much fun with their EVs, the Mach-Es, and flooring it all the time would overstress the power relay assembly. So they actually have to take the battery down, swap out the PRA, and put it all back together. So again, that's another warranty item. They're going to fix that. I just wanted to show you something I've actually found myself while working on vehicles. There is a fuse that's in the power relay assembly. It's not always like this. Sometimes the fuse is on the battery. I had an Ionic, and you'll see a video there where the cause of the problem was actually the fuse. Inside these fuses is actually some ceramic. It's not built like you would think. And over time, they can break down inside. So this is one small issue you could have. It's a very easy fix. For inexperienced technicians, though, it might be a little harder to find. So those are just some of the things I've noticed. Mach-E's, power relay assemblies, ICCU update from Hyundai Kia, and the fuse in these might be some of the things you want to look out for if you're a technician and you're listening to this podcast. Another piece of news is that Fisker is actually going into bankruptcy protection, or at least they're talking about it. And that's kind of disappointing because this is the second time round for Fisker. They came out with the Fisker Ocean. It finally started getting delivered to customers, so they must be very disappointed to hear this news. And the reviews haven't been great on the Fisker. I haven't even had a chance to drive it yet. So I hope they're able to save it. I hope some other OEMs can maybe blend them in, kind of like Fiat was absorbed by Chrysler back in the day. And they do that all the time. I really hope they can rescue Fisker. And it's actually nice to see. EV sales are going up in one regard. The Mach-E, for example, has actually gone up tremendously. So it does prove that people are interested in EVs, but for the right price. And that is that mainstream problem. People want to be able to compare them to other vehicles. So for example, I think a base model Mach-E is around 58,000 Canadian. And they're offering 0.99% interest on those vehicles right now. So great deals to be had on Ford Mach-E's. And because of that, the sales have gone up quite a bit. In fact, they've risen to 13.3%, up from 5%, just due to those lower prices. So we are doing something great in the industry. People are noticing, and you're going to see a lot more Mach-E's on the road, especially now that they have access to those Tesla Superchargers. And this one, the last one's a little bit funny. They were caught over at SpaceX. SpaceX is one of the companies that Elon Musk runs, and they have actually chosen to use a Ford F-150 Lightning for their operations at SpaceX. They chose it over the Tesla Cybertruck, which I just find hilarious. So I wanted to point that out as my last piece of news. Check that out. It really is kind of funny. Honestly, they're using the Ford F-150 Lightning because it better suits their needs. They know it's reliable. They know it's going to work. So great job to Ford. You built a great product. So good that Elon Musk's company is actually using it for their work. So that brings us to the end of the news today. If you're listening to this on Spotify, I want to hear your comments down below. I have opened that up so you can leave comments there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, as always, I read all the comments on our YouTube channel. Please, if you find something in the news that you want me to talk about, put it down in the comments. If you have a question, put it down in the comments. And if you just want to talk about the channel or say, hey, you did a great job, again, leave it in the comments. I read all of them. Now, if you found this interesting, like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We do reviews, tech tips, and sometimes interviews as well. And now we even do podcasts. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching or listening.